Hello and welcome to the state of Kentucky, Friday, April 24th. I'm Bruce Maples, your host, and we're going to be joined in just a moment by Tiffany Pyette to talk to us about Indigenous peoples and COVID-19, and then by Ryan Olexia to talk to us about his campaign. Since we are a once-a-week show, it's not too often that I get to say the words breaking news, but we actually have some breaking news today. It was just announced that Governor Beshear and Secretary of State Adams have reached an agreement on absentee voting for the primary, basically allowing unlimited absentee voting. If you have followed the issue of absentee voting and mail-in voting in Kentucky, you know what a big deal this is. In the past, it's been relatively hard to get an absentee ballot. You had to have certain rules. You had to meet certain requirements. I know my wife and I tried a couple of times to vote absentee, and because we didn't meet any of those requirements, we weren't able to get an absentee ballot. But it appears that at least for this primary, we're going to have relatively unlimited absentee voting. That's a big deal, and I'll have a story up on the website about it a little bit later this afternoon once we get through this show. Speaking of this show, we are, of course, in the midst of this pandemic, and I was on a call recently listening to some updates from various organizations, and one person mentioned something that I hadn't even thought about, and that was the problem of Native Americans or Indigenous peoples dealing with COVID-19, and I thought to myself, okay, is that a Kentucky problem? Is that a United States problem? What kind of problem is that? And so I contacted the person who was making the comments, and turns out that she herself is one of these Native Americans, Indigenous peoples. And by the way, we're going to ask her about that, what words to use. And she has some really good insights into what COVID-19 is doing to those groups. So we're going to welcome right now Tiffany Pyette, Pyette, if I remember correctly. Tiffany, welcome to the state of Kentucky.
Thank you.
It's really good to have you on here, and I'm going to say it on the show just like I said it when we met up a few minutes ago. I really love those earrings. Those are really cool looking.
I appreciate that.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. What's your background? And, you know, do you have a day job? And what's your Native American background? And just go for it.
Okay. So I'm an Indigenous activist. I don't have like a traditional day job, but I do a lot of activism and advocacy around environmental issues and human rights issues. And as far as my Indigenous background, my father's side is Cherokee. And so I spend a lot of time with my tribe, but also with other tribes. And I think that's something that has allowed me to have insight into this situation, is that Indigenous people have a lot of shared pains over time. Sure. And so we've developed a lot of strong connections and have a network now. So I've been able to kind of stay in touch with things that are happening even in reservations that are very far away from where I am physically.
Okay. So let's get this out of the way early. What's the preferred term here? Native American or Indigenous? Or are they both okay, or what?
I think that different people have different preferences. My personal preference is Indigenous. But I think that the reason that some people have issues with Native American is that our cultures are older than America. It's not in any disrespect to America. It's that we were here before that, and there is context to be had. And Indigenous means that it has always belonged, and I think that's a more fitting term. I highly doubt you'll offend anyone if you say Native American. I frequently will just say natives or Indigenous, or I will name the tribe.
Okay. That's good. Part of my own journey as a privileged white person is becoming aware of preferences that other people have for being named. And I'm trying to be sensitive to that. So I'm glad that Native American is okay, since that's what I used in the story description. And that leads to another question I have, which, or not a question maybe, but an observation. When I think of Native Americans or indigenous peoples, my mind immediately goes to reservations. You know, it immediately goes to, okay, here's a group over here and a group over here, and so on and so forth. And when you were on this call and said you live in Prestonsburg, if I remember correctly,
I do.
I thought, wait a minute, we have a Native American living in Prestonsburg, and of course, then I said, well, of course we do. You know, that's just stupid not to think that they're here. But go into that for me for just a moment. What's the makeup in Kentucky? And when we talk about indigenous peoples living currently in Kentucky, not the backstory, although I did go to your site and look at some of the maps and stuff about lands, which I found very helpful. What's the population like, or the makeup like, in the state now?
I don't know the current census data, but I do know that in 2010, there were over 10,000 Native Americans in Kentucky that were registered on the census. And then you also have to add in that not everybody feels comfortable registering on the census. Indigenous people have a long record of feeling distrustful of government registries because a lot of that played into relocation. Like Cherokee people were at least twice the size that their population is now because of the relocation in the Trail of Tears. And so like those wounds create a lot of hiding, especially in the Appalachian area, for people's families. But like what I would call myself, because I don't live on a reservation, is an urban native. So you're still connected to your culture, but you're not on the reservation or on the Qualla boundary, which is what the Cherokee land is, because it's not a reservation, it's a land trust.
Okay, yeah. And again, that's, you know, a new fact for me. So thank you for sharing that. Do indigenous peoples in Kentucky, is there any examples or any sense of living together? Do they tend to congregate in any way, or are they pretty much mixed into the population?
I think for the most part, people are scattered due to, you know, generational problems that have happened and the need to survive. I think in Kentucky there are some communities that are intertribal indigenous. Like there's one in Richmond, Kentucky, that's several different tribes all living together and keeping their traditions in a more insulated way. Right. And I think that's so beautiful and powerful. But a lot of people don't grow up in Kentucky with the privilege of growing up with their culture. They would have to travel to their tribe every so often to maintain those ceremonies, and learning the languages are very difficult to do when you're in a white man's world.
Right. There's just so much here I'd like to unpack, but I really want to get to the original question, which is COVID-19 and problems specific to dealing with that to indigenous people. So talk to me about what you meant by that. You just sort of mentioned it and talked about it briefly on the call, but I have a feeling there's a lot more there.
There definitely is. I think the core of why it's affecting reservation communities specifically so hard, and it was something that I saw coming and I knew was going to happen, and now we're seeing it actively happen, is that there was already so much that reservations were having to deal with. And then they were just completely ill-equipped to handle it because of this just generational fault of the government to provide what was agreed upon. I think a lot of people don't know that part of our treaties that were signed with the government include that Native people will get health care, that they will get quality health care. And that is not free. That has been paid for with land and with lives. And those are important agreements to keep. It is a treaty that is being actively broken every day that a hospital goes without aid. I think I wrote down the statistic that 16% of tribal communities are reporting that they have received financial aid from the government for COVID-19. 16.
16.
Yes.
Wow.
And 4% is receiving protective equipment. So like we have conversations about PPE in Kentucky and how like we're not getting enough, but in reality, there are places who are getting none because they are having to compete with the bids from states, the bids from the federal government, and you stack a small reservation against that, and that doesn't, they don't have the funding for that. The Indian Health Services, which is the system that, the big healthcare system that covers all of the natives that are under federally recognized tribes, it serves 2.5 million Native Americans.
Wait a minute, you broke up. How many?
2.5 million.
Okay, 2.5.
Yeah. And that's across 573 federally recognized tribes. And the entire IHS, the entire Indian Health Services, has 81 ventilators.
Wow.
So when you think about that, you have to think about who gets them and which tribes are we saying your culture, your people, your lineage that has been prayed for and fought for all of this time, that yours is expendable to us. You know, those are the messages that come through for Indigenous people. And there are a lot of complications that come with living on a reservation.
Sure.
People have, like, it may not be common knowledge, but on the Navajo reservation, most people don't have running water. So how can you ask people to wash their hands multiple times a day if they cannot wash their hands at all? How can you ask people to isolate when on the Wind River Reservation, they have up to 14 people in a home? These are complications that the outside world does not necessarily have.
So let me ask you a question about that. What's the incidence rate right now? Do you know of how many cases, confirmed cases, there are across that population?
Well, it's impossible for me to say like across every single Indigenous tribe because
Sure.
many tribes have not received their test kits yet at all.
Okay. Wow.
So they have not even been able to follow the protocol because they don't know who has it. And that's another complication, is that the government hasn't set up the test kits. But what we do know is that the Navajo reservation has the largest amount of cases per capita of any, like, including every state except for New York and New Jersey. So wow. That's, like, to put into perspective, per capita, they are really suffering and really experiencing a really high incidence rate.
That's, you know, the numbers you put out there, 81 ventilators for a population of 2.4 million, I believe is what you said. 2.5. To put that into some context, the population of Kentucky is 4.1 million, if I remember correctly. And so 81 ventilators for more than half the state of Kentucky would be just, people would be going crazy. They'd be like, that's totally unacceptable.
Yeah.
And yet that's what we have with the Indian Health Service. Is anybody advocating for these people? Is anybody raising Cain about it?
I think that some are. I think that obviously the tribes themselves are trying, but they're also very overwhelmed because this is larger than anything that most tribes have had to deal with since the Spanish flu. And there have been so many different harms done to tribal communities over time that they're just so far behind in the amount of aid that they require. The Indian Health Services was not up to the standard of state services that we have. So I think that they said it was like 10 million that it was behind in funding to bring it up to adequate care. So that was before the pandemic. And now they're being added this, extra complication, and it's just extremely difficult to keep up. A lot of reservations have unfinished homes. So, keeping contagions in are also very difficult. I think that when people try to kind of bring awareness to things, it's hard right now because people are a little focused on what seems close to them and what seems it's like you said, you wondered if this has any relevance to Kentucky. A lot of people have that. They're focused on their local home place. But what I would like to encourage of your viewers is that we're all on Indigenous land. And no matter where you're sitting, you are on Indigenous land. And a way to honor that land is to honor everybody on it, no exceptions, and to care for them. And I think that we need to think about who's not being cared for.
Sure.
And the fact that these are the original caretakers of the land that we sit on. Those are things that we should be paying attention to.
I'm sure, as I'm sitting here, that there's some element of racism playing into this. Again, because we don't have a large contingent of, or as far as we know, we don't have a large contingent of Native Americans in Kentucky. It's not necessarily something that rises to top of mind as much as Black Americans or Hispanic or whatever. But I have talked to people, friends of mine who are from Texas and other parts of that part of the country. And they talk about the racism that some of the Native Americans experience. And I just feel like that's got to be part of this, is that, okay, that's those people over there and we don't care about what happens to them. Is that an accurate feeling on my part?
Yes, absolutely. I think an important piece of context for people is what reservations are. Reservations were never intended for people to live on them. They were intended for people to go die on them. Okay. In relocation, people were relocated off of land and put on a reservation with kind of the implication that you would dwindle down while you lived there. That's the reason why there aren't improvements being made on reservations. That's the reason why they aren't like these flourishing, beautiful communities. They are poverty-ridden. The poorest place in the United States is the Pine Ridge Reservation.
Right.
So because of that context, there is kind of this implication that if they die, like, oh, well, it's kind of surprising they lived this long because this is our country now.
Is it also accurate to say that most of these reservations are in red states? And I don't mean that racially, I mean politically. That they have governors who have not done anything about the pandemic, or have certainly not done stay-at-home orders or anything like that. Is that accurate?
It is for some of them. I think there are some areas that have really incredible people in government. Some of them have Native women in government that are really advocating for their states and for their more local governments. So it's not true of everywhere, but it is true of some of those places that people have faced really extreme discrimination. And when they, kind of try to explain to their government that they don't feel represented and that they don't feel provided for, that is gone on deaf ears. And I think that that's something that Kentuckians can relate to, is that at various times we may have felt like systems or companies or something has not listened to us about our lives or our land. And I think that's a commonality that I think we share.
That's an interesting point, because I read about an organization, and I've wanted to do a story about it or an interview, that brings people of different backgrounds together. This particular story was about bringing urban poor and rural poor together and sharing stories together. And basically, pretty much every time they did this, people went, "Oh, well, we're a lot more alike than we are different." And the idea of the forgotten places certainly reminds me to some extent of East Kentucky, which is certainly in some ways a forgotten place. So I've got two last questions. First of all, tell me something good. Tell me something somebody's doing that's positive. You mentioned the elected officials. Is there something in this story that can give us hope?
Yeah, absolutely. Some of me and my mutual aid friends are actually working on a project distributing hand sanitizer to the Navajo reservation, and also getting money on the ground to other reservations to buy what they need right now. And we're going to have a auction on May Day, a benefit auction. So that's going to be on Facebook. If anyone would like to look at it or bid on something, we would certainly love to have you. And that's, we have a Facebook group. It's called COVID-19 Reservation Mutual Aid.
Okay. So if you'll send me all that information, of course, I'll get it up on the site. Speaking of the hand sanitizer, a number of the distilleries in Kentucky are making hand sanitizer. Are you getting any donations from them?
Yes, we have, from one of the distilleries here in Kentucky was one of our donors. And certainly if any others would like to be involved in that effort, I'd love to connect with them too.
Okay, so my last question is, we're not there, we're here. What can we do? What, if you were going to say, if somebody walked up to you on the street and said, okay, I want to help with this problem with Indigenous peoples and COVID-19, what can I do?
Really, I think the largest needs are things like, if you sew, mask making is really helpful. The Navajo Nation is really in deep need of masks and homemade gowns. Their deputy chief pediatrics director has asked for as many as people can send. And we have that address in our Facebook group that people can plug in with. Or if they prefer to do things monetarily, they can take part in the auction, or just send us money directly, and we'll get it in the hands of people who need it.
Okay, so the Facebook group again is COVID-19 Indigenous Mutual Aid. Is that right?
Reservation Mutual Aid.
Reservation Mutual Aid. Okay. Tiffany Pyette, thank you so much. This has been very informative for me, and I'm sure for our viewers and listeners to the podcast, it will be informative for them. Thank you for all you do, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
That was Tiffany Pyette, who is an activist for Indigenous peoples. I'm very, moved by that. It was a completely unknown space to me pretty much until this interview. So we will put a story up in the next few days about the Facebook page and about the auction and about how you can help. So I hope that a number of you will do that and will help Tiffany and her group with their work. Certainly, I hope some of the distilleries will hear about this and send some of their production to this group so they can have hand sanitizer at the very least. Once again, this is the state of Kentucky, broadcast once a week, at least for now. There's a number of things going on the website. I won't tell you about all of them, but I'm doing a story series called Dear Kentuckians about things we should know about the pandemic and ways we should respond. We have dropped our paywall for now, and so you can read all the stories without having to be a member. But obviously, membership is how we pay the bills. So if you would like to become a member, let me put this on the up on the screen. You go to forwardky.com/join, and we appreciate it. The cheapest membership is $3 a month, which most people I think can probably afford, but it makes a big difference for us. And as I get ready to bring Ryan on, let me also put this up. If you comment, we can see the comments, and we can share them on the screen and maybe even ask them of the person who's speaking. So our second guest today is Ryan Olexia. I misspelled his name the first time I wrote to him, so I'm really positively working on getting that name right. Ryan is running for State Senate in District 23. Ryan Olexia, welcome to the state of Kentucky.
Hey, Bruce, thank you very much for having me. I'm pretty excited to be with you. Thank you.
Well, we're excited to have you. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background. I have gathered some of it from your website and from your various postings on social media, but why don't you just tell us?
So I live here in Northern Kentucky in Park Hills. I have a small business in Fort Mitchell. I own a veterinary practice there with my wife. I originally am from West Virginia. I grew up in a little steel town called Weirton, West Virginia, which is just across the Ohio River from Steubenville. My dad, my grandfathers, my uncles, great uncles, everybody worked in the steel industry for the last 120 years or so, or 100 years, until it kind of collapsed over the last 15, 20 years. But they were all, from about 1952 on, they were all union steel workers and industrial workers. My grandfather was a politician in eastern Ohio, around Steubenville, Ohio. He was a county commissioner and a mayor of a small town over there called Mingo Junction. But so I grew up with a little bit of a strong Democratic base. I was taught at a young age that sort of what we valued hard work and valued other people around us and valued our neighborhood and the community that we lived in. But so from Weirton, West Virginia, I went to West Virginia University, then to Ohio State for a veterinary school, met my wife who's from Northern Kentucky here. And we made a little promise that if she let me join the Army and go on a little adventure, then I'd move back here to Kentucky. And here we are. So I was in the Army for 3 years, went overseas to the Middle East for a year, moved back here in 2012. And since then we've worked in private practice, opened up our practice. The community has been extremely welcoming to us. It's been very rewarding. And, after a couple of years, you just start looking around, and I just got a little bit frustrated with what I saw out of the state and local politics, and decided it was time to maybe get in the arena and see what we could do to help.
So what specifically frustrated you enough to make you want to run?
Well, I think it's pretty straightforward for me, is that a lot of the policies that were coming from Frankfurt were hyper-partisan, they were divisive, and they were not really focusing on the things that would improve the lives of Kentuckians. The things that really matter, that really can help provide a prosperous future for the state of Kentucky, is focusing on things that are important to everybody, which is public education, access to affordable health care, working for the working people of the state of Kentucky, and then lastly, shoring up that pension program. So those were things that, and also I look back at the last 4 years of the governor, Bevin, when he was in office. He was extremely divisive. And I saw that, the incumbent in this district was sort of his right-hand man. He was the guy who was enabling a lot of the Bevin policies, taking away from public education and almost, vindictively going after the teachers in this state. And again, the incumbent was kind of the driving force behind that. So long story, sorry.
No, that's fine. The incumbent is Chris McDaniel, correct?
Yes, sir.
And how long has he been in that seat?
Since 2012.
Okay. So this is your first campaign, I take it?
Oh yes, as it may be apparent, I'm not exactly a politician, but I have paid attention to politics for a long time. But now it's just, again, one of those things I just could not sit on the sideline, and there was, no one was going to run against him, and I felt like on paper my story kind of matches up with his, and so yeah, my first campaign.
Okay. Obviously, any challenger to an incumbent usually counts on ground game, usually counts on getting out and doing the walking the streets and knocking the doors and so on and so forth. And so you can't do that now. So how are you campaigning?
So it has been challenging, but again, like I said, this is my first campaign, so I don't really know what the traditional thing traditional campaigning has been like besides what people tell me. So a lot of it, for the last couple months, it's just been picking up the phone, calling anybody in the area who potentially may vote for me, So we did take a break for 3 weeks because I think I just wanted to make sure, number one, that my business was okay, but also I didn't want to call people and talk about politics when they were fearful for their economic, future, fearful for their family's health. But we took about 3 weeks off, and then I saw that during that time, the legislature down in Frankfurt was passing laws that had absolutely nothing to do with, providing for the state through this pandemic or helping the state through this pandemic. They were focusing on, more divisive issues like voter ID laws. And I was like, you know what, if they're going to do that, I'm going to get back into this, and I'm going to start picking up the phone. So besides trying to keep my business afloat and try to do homeschool with our kids, which is challenging, fun, but challenging. So trying to do that while making phone calls, while doing interviews and stuff like this, it's been challenging, but it actually has been pretty amazing couple weeks.
How many voters are in that district total?
So the Senate district's 110,000.
Okay, all right. So really doing something like direct mail isn't practical. A, it's expensive, and B, most of us would probably throw it away just because of the pandemic. Phone calling is good. Have you been doing lots of interviews?
So I've not necessarily interviews like yours, but we've been doing a lot of FaceTime chats, our Facebook chats and Zoom chats. Anytime you can figure out a way to reach many, more than one person at a time, we're doing that. The hard part is whenever you do something like a Facebook chat or something, you end up talking to the people who are somewhat supportive already or somewhat interested. So that's where the phone calls come in and reaching out to people who you don't necessarily know yet. But yeah, it's we have been doing, talking to as many people as we can via the Zoom and stuff like this.
That's as I remember, a pretty Republican district. And yet there was some flip toward Bashir, at least in the last election. What sort of response are you getting? Are people up there, ready to get rid of Mr. McDaniel, or are they satisfied with him and you've got a really hard slog?
Well, I think it's really important that, one of the things that brought me into this election was a friend of mine, a friend of the family who actually is the godfather of my niece, is Robert Connie, who I saw him a couple of days after the election in 2019 when Governor Bashir was elected, and he had we were talking. I told him I listened to his show, and he said, wait, where do you live? And I said where I live, and he said, he pointed out something to me that Governor Bashir carried this district by 5.5% or 2,343 votes. So I think people were frustrated and ready to turn the page on that Matt Bevin style of politics, and the incumbent has been the driving force of a lot of those policies that have negatively affected our public education and the pension program. And I just feel like Senator McDaniel is absent from the district. A lot of people reach out to him about different things, whether it be Veterans Affairs things or education things, and he's just not really responsive to them. So I have so far gotten an extremely positive response from most people I talk to. A lot of people don't even know who their senator is. So far pretty positive. Can't complain.
Good. Anytime I talk with a candidate, I always end with the same question. You're standing on my front porch, except now, of course, it's a virtual front porch. And my question to you is, why should I vote for you?
I always start off with it. I am as frustrated as people in the community are about how the policies and the politics that have been, come from Frankfurt have been. I'm a dad. I'm a husband. I'm a small business owner. I'm an Army veteran. I'm a member of this community, and I love this community, and I just feel like we have not done enough to improve the future prosperity of the Commonwealth. And I feel like I genuinely have no, there's no special interests that control me, or that, the wealthy few are not the people that I'm in this for. I'm in this for the people of the Commonwealth and to improve their quality of life. So that's about the gist of it.
Okay, good. Well, Ryan Olexia, and I should say Dr. Ryan Olexia, if you are a practicing veterinarian. Good luck in your race. I think it's an interesting space because of what you said about the way the election went last fall. And I'm hopeful that you may pull off an upset and we may be able to see you in Frankfurt soon.
All righty, Bruce. Thank you very much. Thanks for taking the time, and thanks for having me.
Good to have you. Take care. Oh, one more thing. I forgot. Website, Facebook page, where can people get in touch with you?
So we do have a website. It's www.ryanolexia2020.com. We are on Facebook, Ryan Olexia for KY23, and Act Blue. There's a website there, but it's how it is now. Social media, it's pretty easy to find me if you take about 15 seconds to look for me. My name's pretty unique, so it's hard to miss me.
Yeah. All right, Ryan Olexia, Olexia. Go search him up on Facebook, like his page, follow his FaceTime sessions, and thank you for coming on the State of Kentucky.
Thank you, Bruce. Thanks for putting on the show every week. Appreciate it.
All right, bye-bye. Thanks, everybody, for being with us today. These were two great guests, and we're excited about having them. We have some really interesting guests coming up over the next couple of weeks. We have a book author who's going to be with us next week about the United States of Distraction, talking about how our distracted state has led to some of the political things we've seen. And 2 weeks from today, I'm very excited to say that we're going to have Terry Canfield. She is an author and a lawyer and has sort of become a really good analyst of this thing called Trumpism. And I'm very excited to have her here. I think you will want to hear her. We're going to devote the entire show to talking with Terry Canfield. That's it for today. Thank you again for joining us. And I'm going to put up the closer, and this will be up on the website later if you want to watch it. And there's also a podcast with the same name if you just want to listen to the audio. Take care.